Margaret Voss had driven out to Holloway Ridge to close it down, and instead she found the dome lit up like a lantern. The gravel lot, which the Foundation's last site report had described as underused, recommend full closure, had 11 cars parked along the fence line, headlights still ticking as they cooled. A hand-lettered sign leaned against a folding table by the path. Free, last Friday viewing night, bring a jacket. She sat behind the wheel a moment longer than she needed to. Beside her, Theo had his hood up and his phone 2 inches from his face, the posture he'd worn for 8 months now, ever since the funeral. A boy holding very still so nothing else could get in. It was easier, most days, to let him hold still. Margaret had learned to run a foundation, to chair a board, to read a balance sheet at a glance, and none of it had taught her what to do with a grieving 8-year-old who used to be hers to spoil on weekends and was now hers, full stop, every day, forever. So she gave him quiet. She gave him space. She told herself that was the same thing as giving him what he needed. 10 minutes, she told him. I have to do the walkthrough, then we'll go. He didn't answer. She got out anyway, the closure letter folded in her coat pocket like a held breath. A man in work coveralls held the side door for a family of 4, said something that made the youngest one laugh, and then saw Margaret coming up the path, with her collar turned against the wind, and a folder under her arm. His face didn't fall the way most people's did when they recognized her. It just went careful. Miss Voss. He held the door. We didn't know the Foundation was coming out tonight. I'm not staying, she said. I have an inventory to finish before Monday. She glanced past him at the crowd settling into folding chairs around the base of the telescope, at the dome slit cracked open to a sky just going purple. This program was discontinued 18 months ago, Mr. Mercer. I know it was. He said it without apology, the way a man states the weather. Come on in out of the wind, at least. The show's better than the paperwork. I promise you that. Inside, the dome smelled of machine oil and cold metal, and faintly, of hot chocolate from a thermos at the back. A corkboard by the door held photographs gone soft at the corners, school children at the eyepiece, a county fair ribbon, a woman with dark curling hair laughing under the telescope's long white tube. A strip of masking tape beneath it read Sophia. She never missed a Friday. A girl of 7 or 8 peeled off from the crowd and planted herself in front of Margaret with the directness only children manage. Are you here for the program? We're doing Jupiter, and then the double cluster, if it stays clear. She held out a photocopied star chart, slightly crooked from the machine. I'm Mira. That's my dad. She pointed at the man in coveralls, now crouched beside the telescope's drive motor, murmuring to it like it was an old dog. I'm not. Margaret started and stopped. The chart was still being held out to her. She took it. Theo had trailed in behind her and stood near the door with his hands jammed in his pockets, looking at none of it, while the dome lights dimmed and a line began to form at the eyepiece. Margaret found Dan again near the control panel. I have to put something in my report, she said quietly. This isn't authorized. There's no line item for tonight. No insurance rider, no staff pay. If something happened here. Nothing's happened here in 11 years, Dan said, not unkindly. I run the generator on my own gas. I open up Fridays, because Sophia ran it for 15 years before me, and the kids in this town don't have anywhere else that's free and dark enough to actually see something. He glanced toward the corkboard, then back at her, steady. Put whatever you need to put in your report, Ms. Voss. I'm not going to stop doing it because a line got crossed off a budget. He said it without heat, no anger, no plea, and went back to the panel, calling out gently that Jupiter was up, and the line should start moving. Margaret stood there with her folder, the closure letter inside it suddenly heavier than it had been in the car. Theo didn't get in line. He slid along the wall instead, past the corkboard, through a half-open door into a back room lined with shelves, the equipment annex, dim and smelling of dust and paper. He sat down on an overturned crate and put his head against his knees. He didn't hear Mira come in. She didn't say anything at first, just climbed onto a stool at the long table, pulled a notebook toward her, and started writing, the scratch of her pencil, the only sound besides the muffled gasps of delight drifting in from the dome. After a while, Theo lifted his head. What are you doing? The log. She didn't look up. You write down what you saw every Friday. My mom did it for 15 years. There's a whole shelf of hers. She nodded at the shelves, rows of identical green ledgers, dates inked on their spines going back further than Theo had been alive. Now I do it. I copy hers first, so I learn the way, and then I write my own. Theo looked at the shelf for a long moment. Why does it matter? They're just stars. Half of them aren't even there anymore. The light just took forever to get here. He said it flatly, the way he said most things now, like a fact that had stopped meaning anything. Mira considered this with the seriousness of someone who had clearly thought about it before. My mom used to say, the stars don't really say goodbye. She said they just go around to the other side of the night and wait there until you come find them again. She finally looked at him. She died 2 years ago, but I still write the log on Fridays. And Dad still opens the dome, because that's not goodbye either. That's just the other side of the night. Something in Theo's face came apart. Quietly, the way ice goes when no one's watching. No sound, just suddenly water. He put his head back down and his shoulders shook, and Mira didn't say anything else. She just kept writing, sitting close enough that he could feel her there if he needed to. Margaret found them like that. Her grandson crying without trying to hide it for the first time since the funeral. And a 7-year-old beside him, steady as a lighthouse, simply staying. She stopped in the doorway. Dan came up behind her a moment later with 2 mugs of cocoa, saw the same thing, and didn't say a word, just set the mugs down at the edge of the table, within reach, and stepped back out, drawing Margaret gently with him by the elbow before either child could feel watched. In the corridor, Margaret found she couldn't make her voice work for a moment. He hasn't 8 months. He hasn't cried. Not at the funeral. Not. I didn't know what to do, so I let him be quiet, and I told myself that meant he was all right. He's not all right, Dan said. But he's not alone in there either. That's most of it some nights. He nodded toward the annex door. Mira's had 2 years' practice being the one who stays. How does she do it? Margaret asked. How does a 7-year-old just sit with that? She doesn't think of it as sitting with anything, Dan said. To her, it's just Friday. You write the log, you watch the sky, and you don't leave anybody by themselves in the dark if you can help it. Sophia raised her on it, without ever meaning to teach a lesson. It just turned out to be one. Margaret looked down at the closure letter she was still, somehow, holding. She didn't say anything else. While she waited for the children, Margaret made herself useful the only way she knew how. She went through the annex with her clipboard, doing the inventory she'd come for, because if she stood still any longer, she thought she might cry too. The shelf of green ledgers took up most of one wall. She pulled the most recent one, still in use, a third of its pages blank, and flipped through it, out of nothing but the need to keep her hands moving. The handwriting changed partway down one page. A looping, confident cursive gave way to a plainer, careful hand, as if someone had picked up a pen they weren't quite used to and kept going anyway. Near the back, one entry was circled twice and underlined hard enough to tear the paper. Star 4477219. Up almost half a magnitude from last month. Checked it 3 times. Not an instrument error. Check again next clear night. Below it, in the same plain hand, a date from 3 weeks earlier. And beside it, checked again. Still up. Wrote to the university. No answer yet. Margaret didn't know what a magnitude was, but she photographed the page anyway, for no reason she could have explained, and slid the ledger back onto the shelf. The following Tuesday, she put the photograph in front of Dr. Halpern, the Foundation's astronomy advisor, mostly to fill a silence in a meeting that had grown awkward. She watched him go very still. "Where did you get this?" she told him. He was already pulling something up on his laptop, an open alert from a state university survey, sitting unanswered for weeks, asking amateur observers across 3 states to confirm a brightening their own automated system had, flagged and then lost in the clouds. This star has been logged from one hillside, by hand, every clear Friday for 15 years, Halpern said, tapping the photograph. Nobody automates that. Nobody pays for that. That's the kind of long, boring, unbroken record that makes a real discovery possible, and somebody just kept doing it. After everything. He looked up at her. Who's DM? The second hand in this ledger. The custodian, Margaret said, and heard how wrong the word sounded as it left her mouth. The appraiser the Foundation had sent to assess the telescope for scrap value before demolition called her 2 days later, sounding almost apologetic. There's an inscription inside the mirror cell, he said, hand engraved. SM and DM, ground and figured by hand. The winter the Foundation couldn't afford a new one. There's a date. 25 years ago. He paused. Mrs. Voss, this mirror isn't a liability on your books. Somebody made it. By hand. In a barn. From the look of the records, there's a whole folder on it. It's not obsolete. It's the only one of its kind there will ever be. Margaret drove back out to Holloway Ridge on a Friday, without a folder this time. She found Dan exactly where she'd first seen him, holding the door for a family coming up the path. "The sales is off," she said before he could ask. "The foundation's funding a full restoration, new dome motor, new roof, all of it. And the survey, the one you and Sophia kept going, the university wants to formalize it, officially, with both your names on it." She had to stop and start again. "They're calling it the Mercer Survey. And the observatory, the board voted this morning. They want to rename it for her, if that's all right with you." Dan didn't say anything for a moment. He looked past Margaret, toward the dome, where Mira and Theo were already arguing happily over whose turn it was to set up the chairs. "She'd have liked that," he said finally. "She always said this place would still be standing long after the rest of us." He looked back at Margaret. "There a job in this, or do I keep doing it on my own gas?" "There's a job in it," Margaret said, and for the first time since she'd arrived at Holloway Ridge, she found herself almost smiling. "Year-round, educator and caretaker. The board already approved it. I made sure of that part myself." Dan nodded once, like a man accepting a delivery he'd been expecting for a long time, and went back to holding the door. The following spring, the foundation hung a new sign at the gate, "The Sophia Mercer Observatory," in letters that caught the last of the daylight, and more cars than the lot had ever held lined the road on both sides for the rededication. Margaret stood near the back of the crowd with Dan, watching Mira and Theo run the line at the eyepiece exactly the way they'd practiced. Mira, showing each child where to look, Theo holding the step stool steady, both of them ending every turn the same way, pointing out one last star, low in the west, and saying, together, that one saying goodnight, not goodbye. It had become a tradition in 4 months. Margaret suspected it would outlast all of them. When the line finally thinned, near the end of the night, Mira tugged Theo toward the door, the two of them already arguing about who got the last cup of cocoa. Dan watched them go, then looked up at the sky, the way he must have done 10,000 times before, easily, like checking a clock. Margaret had come to Holloway Ridge 8 months ago to close the dome down for good. Tonight, on the night they renamed it for a woman she had never met, she did something she hadn't done since her daughter's funeral. She tipped her head back, found one star low in the west, and said goodnight to it, quietly, the way the children had taught her, certain, for the first time in a long while, that nothing was really gone. Only on the other side of the dark, waiting to be found again.